thought my recent 1860s wrapper dress project would be a cool thing to make into a modern version. I started with this K-Fig 1860s wrapper dress pattern. This is the 1860s version of this dress. It is loose in the front completely, so it's fitted on the back and the sides, but the front is just this open panel, which is fitted down when you wear it with a belt, which makes it like so comfortable, really easy to use for everyday wear. So I just thought it would convert so nicely. There are a couple of major changes that I need to make to it. Primarily is the placement of the sleeves. This obviously has a very low dropped 1860s sleeve on it. So I want to convert that and bring it up more to like a regular dress sleeve length, which you would see. So that's probably going to be the most difficult thing because it may require playing with this actual pattern piece some, but we'll try that. I also want to change the neckline because I don't like this high collared neckline. So I think I'll convert it to being something more like of a neckline along these lines, which I think is a little bit more modern and will also be a lot more comfortable to wear, especially for a warm summer dress. So I just need to sort of turn in this pattern piece and make it straight instead of wrap around the neck like it is now. I don't think my version will have any sleeves. I think I'm gonna make it sleeveless, but I'll play around with that. And then finally is gonna be the length of the dress. This is a very long dress, even over petticoats it's fuller length. So I think I'm gonna convert it to be maybe about knee length or so. We'll see what looks best. Also, the skirts of this are totally unlined, so it's totally open on the inside. But the fabric that I'm going to be using is a rather sheer linen, so I will need to fully line the dress that I'm going to make. So those are the changes that I need to make, and I'm going to start out just by taking the pattern off of this one, making some of those changes that I talked about, and then fitting a primary muslin to start seeing how we're going to fit the changes to this dress. As a reminder, I've already done the work of altering this pattern so that it fits me. I'm not working off the original K-Fig pattern with these changes, but rather the pattern that I already made changes to. If you want to see more information about the initial changes I made to the fit of this pattern, please see my video about my 1860s wrapper project, where I go into lots of detail about the alterations I made. I'm tracing off my base pattern for this garment and then marking in changes on my new fitting muslin. I'm just totally guessing on these changes at this point and haven't done anything off of measurements or anything precise like that. This is just a gut feeling of what I think the changes to the arm's eye and the neckline need to look like. Here we have the first mock-up that I've done on this piece. You can see that the shoulders are still way too dropped, so it needs to come up more. And I went ahead and already marked in a line of where I'm going to cut this for the next thing. It's also too big in the back, so I put a line where I could reach, and then I'll just have to make up the rest. Also, the neckline is still a little bit too closed, so I went ahead and drew in a new line for where I'll cut the neckline next. You can sort of see what that's going to look like when I fold this back. So I like this more V-neck style a little bit more, but so far it looks good. So I'm going to make those changes directly onto this mock-up and then just try it on again. All right, and now we have those changes that I made to it. So this is a much better modern shoulder line. I think I'll still need to tighten up this part, so maybe take out a little bit of length right at this corner here. I also like the neckline a lot more. I think this will probably, the lining will just drop and then I'll have it pin in the center, and then the rest of the dress will just cover the top of this here. But I think that's a little bit more of an attractive modern line. And I also dropped the neckline a little bit as well, just so it's a little bit looser and more comfortable. So I am actually really happy with this. I think I'm gonna go ahead and cut this pattern out of my actual lining fabric, which is gonna be a really nice cotton shirting material that I have. So I'm pretty pleased with this. It's going pretty quickly, yay. Now that the muslin is all cut out, it's time to cut out my fashion fabric as well for the bodice. I'm using this really beautiful piece of linen that I've had in my stash for a long time. It's a really interesting texture because it's almost shot with blue and green, so there's a lot of colors in it, and when you put it all together, it has this really lovely sea green color. It is very sheer, as I'm sure you can see. And it's a very, very loosely woven linen, which is one of the reasons why I'm having to fully line everything. Obviously this wouldn't work for a modern dress without a lining underneath it. I originally bought this for a Regency dress, but I just never got around to making it, so it's been sitting in my stash for probably somewhere around 8 years now. So I'm really excited to finally be using it for something that I think will make a really great modern dress. The one thing I'm worried about is because it is so sheer and so loosely woven, it has a real tendency to fray at the edges, so I'll have to really think about how I'm going to finish all the edges on this dress to make sure it can stand up to washing in the washing machine, because I don't want to have a modern dress that I have to worry about hand washing every time I wear it. Oliver was pretty upset that I wanted to cut up the fun new toy I had put on the floor for him to play with. This dress has some of the most unusual bodice construction I've ever dealt with, so I may be taking some steps here that seem really weird right now, but I promise they make sense in the end. This fabric is so wobbly that I had to really wrangle it through my sewing machine to make sure everything was staying flat and aligned. Since this fabric is so prone to raveling, I had to finish every edge. I don't own a serger, so I zigzag stitched every raw edge of the bodice pieces to help it hold together in the wash. Doing this really showed off how imprecise the cutting was on my linen layer, so wobbly. So I trimmed off any excess fabric along the edges of the zigzags. Once all of that was done, I began construction on the bodice itself. Now my bodice is all sewn together on the side seams. The shoulder seams are left undone because of a weird quirk with this pattern, so you'll see that later. I'm realizing now that I messed up the pattern pieces where the center back and the sides meet, and I've got some mismatched seam lines. What I should have done is waited until I had all this sewn together and then evened up these bottom pieces and then zigzagged it, because now I have my zigzagged part not matching, so I'll have to kind of deal with this when I put on the piping. My next step now is to finish these front edges so that they close. I think I'm going to use hook and eye tape, but but I'm gonna try it on first and just see how I think that's gonna look. Here is the first try on of the bodice. I just have it pinned closed. As you can see, there's quite a lot of overlap here, so I think I'm actually gonna trim off a lot of this. I just don't want this extra bulk here. I just have my darts pinned in right now. Once I get the front closures done, I will try it on again, double check that these darts are in the right place, and then I'll sew those down. The neckline has a really nice shape to it. That's about what it's gonna look like. So I'm really happy with how this is turning out. I did end up cutting this bit too long somehow, so that'll get trimmed off. But yeah.
I ended up just sewing on a few hooks and eyes for closures.
All right, progress has been made. I have put in hooks and eyes. I just put in 3. I think I'm probably gonna need another one here, but for now that's good. I've sewn down the darts now, so it fits a little bit better. I'm having some problems with the neckline. It's really floppy. I may be able to fix that by just turning everything under one more time, except that makes for a much deeper neckline than I would have wanted. But I'm gonna wait until I have the front panel on to sort of see how that's gonna fall before I make a final decision with what to do here. So for now, I'm just gonna leave it. Now my next step is to pipe this waistline, and then it's time to get started on the skirts. Yay.
The vast majority of this dress was sewn by machine, but there were a few spots where I sewed it by hand, like finishing the piping you see here.
All done with the piping. As you can see, this creates just a lovely, neat finish on both the outside and the inside as well.
Now it's time to cut out the front panel, which was much easier to do when the skirts weren't attached yet. In the original pattern, there is a pattern piece for this section, but I'm just cutting it based off the bodice as I've altered it and knowing what lengths I need to add for skirts. I found it easier to just mark out my lines right on the fashion fabric and cut from there, since this is such a fiddly fabric that's prone to movement. I'm also just estimating how much extra fabric I need to add for the front gathers. This ended up being a little bit fuller than what I would have preferred, but not so much that it ruined the dress. I pinned a lot along my marking lines to keep the fabric from shifting too much.
All right, I'm gonna cut out the skirt panel now. The original pattern actually called for 2 panels for the back part of the skirt, but I'm not gonna cut this dress anywhere near that full. It doesn't need the volume because obviously it's not going over a lot of petticoats or a hoop skirt or anything like that, and it's only gonna go to my knees. So I'm just gonna do one width of fabric and just sort of pleat it around the back and the sides where it'll merge into that front piece that I cut. So that's all I need for this. So I'm gonna cut this down. I measured that I need it to be a 26-inch skirt, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut that out now.
The skirt and skirt linings are made up and inserted totally separately. This is a weird way of doing it, but because of the way the front panel works, I didn't want to double line any part of the bodice or the skirts, but I also couldn't leave the front skirt unlined. This is adding a lot of complexity to the construction of this piece, but I couldn't figure out an easier way around it. The linen skirt is only attached to the section of the bodice with the linen fashion fabric layer, while the lining fabric attaches all the way around the bodice. The lining is a soft, lightweight cotton. Because of all the layers of pleats and all those different pins, I hand sewed the bodice to the skirts. I didn't want to struggle with finding all those pins while I sewed by machine. This took longer, but it was actually a lot easier.
The skirts are now all sewn on to the waistline with a little back stitch that I put in there. Because I have these fabrics stacked instead of together, there are a lot of layers, so there's a possibility it's going to make this waistline really bulky, but I'm going to try it on and just look and see how it looks. If it looks like it's too bulky, I can just fold both of these layers down and then stitch them to the lining here, which will sort of hold them away from the waist. But I'm going to try it on now and just take a look and see how everything's looking. All right, so here is part of it done. You can see these front lining panels are currently open, but my next step is going to be just to sew this up. So this is actually one piece, and I'll put the dress on by going over my head. But it looks pretty good. Actually, the waistline looks fine. It doesn't seem too bulky at all. In an ideal world, I would have had a little bit more fabric so that I could make a slightly fuller skirt and slightly smaller pleats, but I think the effect is nice and casual, which is exactly what I was going for. Okay, so next I'm going to sew up this panel, and then we're gonna start on the fronts of this dress.
Now that I've sewn on the front panels, the whole front piece flips over and becomes the front of the dress. It's only anchored at that weird side line on the bodice where the linen joins the lining fabric and along the skirt seams. Otherwise, it is totally loose around the front of the dress and is only fitted at the shoulder seam. There is no waistline along this front panel, it's just a single piece. The shoulder is fitted by running a gathering line and fitting it down to the lining of the bodice. Once the front and back shoulders are sewn together, it makes for a neat finish. At this point, I piped the sleeve edges, which I sewed by hand. This made for a nice, neat finish, but it ended up being a little bulky. If I did this again, I would have bound the edges of the arm side in self-bias instead of piping, but it does look cute. The hem required some evening up because of the way the front panel gathers up and hangs down, so I trimmed off the excess, which I figured out by trying it on and marking it, and then I hemmed the dress. The very last step was making up 2 strips and sewing them down to the bodice to act as ties for the waistline. This would also be really cute with a contrasting belt, but I'm always bad about losing those sorts of things, so I wanted something that was permanently attached to this dress to prevent scatterbrainedness. And it's all finished. I'm really pleased with my very first modern dress ever, even if it is a historical piece at heart. If I did this again, I would not choose a sheer fabric. It's a pleasure to wear, but next time I'll make one that doesn't need to be lined, which would make this a very easy project. I definitely made this harder for myself than I needed to, but I just couldn't resist using this beautiful fabric. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please give me a like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe for more historical and historical-ish sewing projects. Have a great day.
Ugh. Hate sewing. Ugh, sucks.